Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am Abe with MysticGenMara.com, and today I want to do a little continuation on some of the names and terms in the alternative religious groups or spiritual groups. And this one is just going to be a kind of a quick overview of the different terms. I'm going to go over a lot of terms that are used in different Wiccan covens to start with, and then go over very briefly terms in the ceremonial mysticism groups, because there's one group in particular I'm going to go over, but there are so many different groups out there, and each group has a different dynamic and a different way of viewing these terms. So be aware that what I'm saying here are very general in most cases, and it depends on the group that you want to join. If you want to join, that is going to really tell you what what their dynamic is. So my goal here is just to go over some of the basics, and then in some cases show how they would apply in the different groups. So to start off with, two of the more common terms you hear in the spiritual community is the priest or priestess, obviously male or female, and that is a person whose office is to perform religious rites, especially to make the sacrificial offerings. Especially in the olden days of the temples, you'd have a normal priest or priestess who would do these offerings. The high priest or high priestess is the chief of the priesthood or that clergy. And this is a person in a very high position of power or influence, generally one who is revered as a preeminent authority or interpreter. Now, that also goes to being, they're the ones who train the priests and priestesses, the underlings basically. They're the ones that set the ritual tones if you're dealing with a coven or if you're dealing with a different agency. They're usually the ones where you go to answer the questions, to clear up misunderstandings, and they're the ones that will pass on the lineage. The priests and priestesses are strictly the worker bees kind of a thing, where the high priest or the priestess is the overseer. They're the ones that really keep everything moving in the right way. Now, we will go over within various Wiccan covens and lineages, there are surprisingly different levels within each group. Some people would say that they're all the same, but they're really not. You have groups that have 3, 4, 5, or 6 tiered systems. The 3-tiered system is called, the levels are called the dedicant, the priest or priestess, and the elder. Now these are general terms in general meanings that's publicly available, so some of the groups are going to be much more secretive, and you will not know until you're involved what those names would be. The 4-tiered system in most cases is a dedicant, a first degree, a second degree, which is your priest or priestess, and the third degree, which is your elder. Now the third degrees can also be referenced as high priests or priestesses. In some cases the elder is a voted in position, and it's only voted from people who have achieved a third degree practitioner level. The 5th tier is broken into dedicant, first degree, second degree, which is your priest or priestess, third degree, high priestess and priest, and then there's the elder level. And that one actually is something that you earn over time. The 6th degree system, which is one I'm seeing pop up much more frequently because it's breaking down so that people have more time to really put in the effort on these various levels. And it's coming down to dedicant, which is a searcher, initiate. It's time to really start learning how the group works. The first degree, a second degree priest or priestess, a third degree high priestess or priest, and then you have your elder level. Generally, in all these tiers, dedicant is a year and a day period, and that time goes back, from what I can understand of it, it goes back more than several thousand years. And it was a time to really start to understand a system. You weren't active in the daily processes, you weren't involved in the rituals, you were basically there to learn if this was a group that you could work with, and during that year you were not allowed to really learn any of the secrets. You were there for the rituals, the Sabbats, the full moons, things like that. It's a very, very good time to research the group, the coven. Sometimes it's certain lodges will do a dedicant period where you have the year and a day to study with that. I know that there are certain branches of different lodges, like I don't think the Masons do it anymore, but there were other groups along those lines that would allow a dedicant to come to public stuff or just to general meetings, not the deep involved stuff, but just so you can get an idea and feel for what they were doing. So that's what the dedicant tier is. Then you move into the first degree, and I'm just going over what these terms mean. And the first degree, okay, the first degree is learning about the rules of the group, getting basic theology and starting spiritual practices. This is where you learn about meditation. This is where you learn about the ethics and morals of the group. This is where you will start to build your Book of Shadows if you are into a Wiccan coven. They really focus on passing it on through your own writing, because if you're writing it down and you're having one of the priests or high priests double check your work, you're going to remember it more because it's in your handwriting. And most of these groups do request, they don't require it anymore, but there for a while they did, that you only write this stuff. You do not put it on a computer, you do not type it, because there's something powerful in writing it in your own hand. It also helps you remember it better. So you start to learn about the outer workings. You start to build those books. And this is the time when you really start to, as you're working your spiritual practices, you're developing your magical skills and your psychic talents, your clairvoyance, your clairaudience. Sometimes during the first degree work, you'll start working with divination, but it kind of depends on the group. Some groups will exclude that until the second degree. Some will let you have it at the first. So, and when I say let you have it, it's them teaching you their style. And it doesn't mean you have to use their style in a lot of ways, but it's a way to pass on a lineage of a group. So you've got like Ardenian witches, which are from Gerald Gardner, the Alexandrian witches, which are from Alex Sanders. They all have their own way of doing things, and that's why you would join that group, is because you want to join their path. And so that's what you would be learning about, is the rules, ethics, and theology in the first degree. In the second degree, this is usually where you have been uplifted or elevated to the level of priest or priestess, and this is, you're dedicated at this point. You've put in a minimum of 2, if not more, years to this group. Spiritually, you're growing. Your theology of the group is your primary focus, so you're helping guide the new dedicants and train the first degrees. You are studying to step into the high clergy, which is your high priest or your priestess level. Magic in theory and sometimes practice is a huge part of this level. Not all covens and not all lodges, just from experience, do mysticism. A lot of them, it is strictly a spiritual path where they're learning how to uplift their minds, they're working on healing rituals and things like that. Some groups will really involve magic and mysticism into that. Others are strictly spiritual groups. And that is something else to look into if you're wanting to grow and you don't want the woo-woo part, the really woo-woo parts, then find a group that only does the spiritual aspect. And it's a once you get up high enough into these levels, the line between spirituality and mysticism literally disappear, because once you evolve to that point, you discover that your will and how you work in the world really is a magical force, and you're using spiritual energy to do that. And so as you grow, it might be something you don't want to use that term, and that's fine. But once you reach a certain point, you're literally in that flow, whether you realized it or not, because that's the path of spirituality, is being able to really conform the world to within the natural laws to how you view it. And as you build spiritually, how you view the world is actually going to grow into a much more peaceful and loving state, and that's the reason that you go through this type of a journey. Now, where are we at? The third degree is the level of the clergy, and this is where I'm old school, and so when people say clergy, I really get frustrated because that's, to me, is a very religious thing, like standard Orthodox religions. And I like to use the term, and this is my opinion, of high priest or high priestess for the third degrees. If you look back to the ancient Egyptians, you had the high priests of the temple. If you look back to the Amazonians, you had high priestesses who were the highest level of active spiritual workers in the groups. I think the reason that we use clergy is it's a term we understand in our culture more clearly now, and it's gender neutral, which I still feel that there is a very distinctive line in the universe with having a masculine and feminine order of things, and I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just saying that that's how I've come to understand divinity. So for me, it's a high priest or high priestess. You basically run the show. You work with the elders to decide who gets to come into the group out of the dedicants. You get to initiate those participants into the next level. You give them the exams to make sure that they are ready to level up. Most of these groups, when you're working at this level, are going to work through a testing protocol that's been established through the lineage. That testing protocol is to make sure that people are actually ready to step into these different levels. Each level that you go into has a set of rules and responsibilities, has an assumption of knowledge and authority that goes with it. So the high priest or the high priestess, they have a very difficult job because they have to administer these tests and decide whether this person is actually dedicated to this group, dedicated to this path, or if they're a charlatan just here to learn some dirty little secrets and then run away and share it. In the old days, these vows were taken with, basically, if you broke your secret vows, they would execute you. And that was a vow that you took. It's gotten way more relaxed here lately, especially with as many books have been published, but there are still groups out there, not so much the execution part, that you will be shunned from the community if you break those sacred vows. And so this is something that, as a third degree, a high priest or high priestess, that is taken very seriously. And to take on that role and to take that title means you have a massive amount of responsibility that you're working with. You are the trainer. You are the one who sets the tone for the rituals. You are the, to use this term, the intercessor between the Lord and Lady of the group you're in and your people. And this is a level that has a very high proficiency in magic, and if your group works with that, and it is an expected proficiency. You don't just ascend to this level and have no knowledge of it if your group practices. You are the one who generally is teaching the next generation and guiding, and like I said, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with the title of high priest or high priestess in a third degree system. Now, moving on from that, and as a high priest, you generally hold that position for a significant length of time. In rare occurrences, you're going to have two sets of high priests and priestesses, but most of the time you'll have one group that is the active roles, and then you'll have the other ones that will rotate in randomly. But this is where, in a lot of covens, you'll either stay or you can hive off at this point. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Then you move into the term elder. An elder is a term that once you have been in the third level or the highest degree of whichever group you're in, 3 through 6, you'll want to step aside. Like you've been doing the active role for so long and you're just kind of needing a break, you can step aside. And at that point you are an advisor. You don't really have an active role anymore, but you are also the judge and the jury for disputes within the coven, and you're the one who holds the ancestral lineage. So you're the one that makes sure, in a lot of cases, that the next generation, that the Book of Shadows that they're working out of, if you guys have that, is correct. You want to make sure that you fine-tune things for them. In some cases, and I personally don't agree with this because it's a personal thing, but in some groups, they actually put this as an elected position, and so everyone in the coven can actually elect out of the high priestess or priest level the elders for the group, and so then it becomes more political. In a lot of cases, and this is how I personally view it, you can step down once you know that you have someone to replace you, and that to me is a much more fluid way of doing it, and you have a less chance of a political upheaval because of someone not liking somebody else type of a thing. So each of these terms do have time limits, not strict or structured because each group is different, but the most common are the dedicant is a year and a day, and that gives you a full year to understand, a day to decide, and then it's either in or out. The first degree is generally a year and a day, but it's extremely intensive. You're working with the second and third degrees on a pretty much weekly basis, if not more frequently than that, and you are being tried. You have to learn this stuff because this is only a short window of time before you move into the next level, and those are a little bit slower because there's more information. And the second and third degrees are based on how fast you can acquire knowledge and skill, and this is where your testing comes in by the third degrees and the elders. The next level, the next time you level up is based on when you are ready to ascend to that level, and this is, you really are working with the inner workings of the group. You're really starting to understand the flow. You're working with the deities that are aligned with that lineage. You're working, if you have that type of group, with mysticism a lot. Knowing the rules, how to deal with the things that are coming up. These are all parts of the second and third degree, and to move from first into second and into third, if the group has that, this is where the testing comes in. And the testing can be a scheduled thing, which is most of the time how it works. But the other part about that, get my notes here because I moved them, you can be tested spontaneously as well. So if the high priest or the elder or priestess decides they've been watching you and they feel that you're ready for the next level, even if you don't think you are, they will randomly start to question you, they'll poke at you. In some cases, you won't even know that you're being tested. That's how smooth some of these elders and high priests can be. And all of a sudden, the next group you get together, you're being ascended because they did the test, you didn't even realize it. So after you've done through the second and third degrees, and you've been active in that for a significant period of time, one of the places that I read, and I tend to lean into this a little bit more, is you've been in a high priest or a leadership role within the group for 3 to 5 years. That's the first time that you really could step into the eldership. And that's kind of the elder, once you achieve that level, that's your level in the group pretty much the rest of your time there. That doesn't mean you can't be active if you choose, but you don't have to be at that point. And so I've, over the years, because I've had a few of them, I've met several people in different groups, and with that knowledge and interactions, and I will not reveal secrets of groups specific because it was entrusted to me through private conversations, and I'm not going to do that. But what I will say is second and third degrees and elders are when a person can hive off and start their own group. So when you hive off, you're taking that lineage, but you have a group of your own that you want to build on the side. And a lot of the times in the hive situation, the main group elders are the elders for your group as well. And once you build your own group up and you start to really develop that group, it's kind of like a pyramid because you have the one high level up here, then you have the next two here, and then you get, you start building down. And in those situations, you are following a lineage. And that's the reason I reference people like Gerald Gardner, who he's an interesting character to say the least, but he did bring a lot of this into the common psyche, but in his group is called the Gardinian lineage. You also have Alex Sanders, who at one point was associated with Gardner, but not closely. It was more like they knew each other type of a thing. I don't remember all the details at this particular moment in time, but he developed his own group called the Alexandrian lineage. and they all have different hived off groups, and most of the time when you hive off of a main group, to carry that name you have to follow the basics of that group. And so that's the reason you have like you'll have high elders and elders and things like that. So it gets it can get really complex as you move up the line there. So that's the basic overview for a coven type environment with Wicca and a lot of that type of groups. The one thing, and I'll repeat this several times, every group is going to have its unique dynamic, and if you're following a lineage, understand what you're getting into. That's the reason they have the dedicant time period. And if you're a solitary person who just kind of does your own thing, if you're going to take on a title, you should definitely understand what those titles mean within the spiritual community and within the outside world. Because if you take on a title and you're not knowledgeable enough to hold that title, people are going to expect things of you, and if you don't have the answers or the knowledge, they're going to respond negatively to you. And that's when you start getting into one of my favorite terms I've heard is the term fluffy bunny mysticism or fluffy bunny spirituality. And that means someone who takes on a title and they are all love and light, but they haven't done any spiritual work. They have no idea what they're talking about. And when you listen to them, you start to question whether or not they've ever meditated a day in their life. And they're just kind of this fluffy little airhead bouncing around out there. And yes, that sounds a little bit rude, but they're the ones that make the rest of the serious practitioners look not cool or not okay. They're the ones that basically give the community a bad name. So if you're going to start working down that path, be sincere in what you're doing, and really, if you're choosing a title, be careful of what those titles mean, because you don't want to disgrace something that you're trying to be serious about. So, and this one is going to be just kind of more of a short touch over, because this is an extremely deep topic, this next groups I'm talking about, because I reference a lot ceremonial groups, covens, magic, mysticism, because it's what fascinates me and where a lot of my research and study has been over the last few years, primarily the last 10 or so. And I'm going to give you examples of titles within one primary group, because each group is a little bit different. And that group is the Golden Dawn. This system was saved from obscurity by two very massive men in the mystical community. The first one has been loved or hated. There is no middle ground with him, and that is Aleister Crowley. He also started multiple other groups on his own. He worked pretty much continuously to bring a lot of the reason we use yoga in a lot of more modern day mystical practices is because of Crowley. He brought this into the Golden Dawn. He brought it into other groups. He really mainstreamed it, to be blunt. People today use it as, think that some of the Swamis and things like that brought it over, but Crowley was working with it in Europe back in the 20s and 30s before it ever made it to mainland United States, at least publicly known. And then you have Israel Regardie, who literally wrote the book on the Golden Dawn. I'm not kidding. It's a 900-page book. It's like 4 inches thick. It is huge. And he wrote it to save the Golden Dawn from obscurity. There were people within the group that were trying to fracture it. They were trying to rename things and adjust it, and it was literally starting to collapse. Crowley and Regardie really did try to save it. Crowley eventually walked away, threw up his hands, and said, unless you guys want to be serious about this, I'm out. So he bounced. But Regardie never gave up on the Golden Dawn. Even to his dying day, he was not so much active in a lodge, but he was trying to actively preserve the lineage and the knowledge, because the knowledge is absolutely fascinating. It's extremely in-depth and intense, because Israel Regardie was also studied a lot into psychology, and so a lot of the terms are very high-minded, so there's times you have to get out a dictionary to understand it. But that was something that he felt very passionately about. Regardie's lineage and texts are some of the most commonly associated with this group, and there are others, but the pure forms actually come from his books. He has the one book, which is the Golden Dawn. He also wrote 4 follow-ups, one of which is just a treatise on magic, but it's still, they're all massive books. But he had 2 of his primary disciples, which is Sheik and Tabitha Cicero, and they've annotated a lot of his work because they literally sat at his knee for years so that they could understand and explain more simply, because some of the stuff he wrote was really, like I said, high-minded, and they were able to make it more accessible. And so if you're looking to understand a lot of this deeper work, those are definitely books to look into. I probably won't link the descriptions just yet. I might post the Golden Dawn one, but the other ones I won't just at the moment. But the Golden Dawn is loosely based on the Jewish mysticism of Kabbalah. It's mixed with several other magical systems. Enochian is one of the primaries that you'll see pop up frequently, and that addition is actually because of Aleister Crowley, because he believed that Enochian magic was one of the most powerful because it literally came from the angels themselves. And like I said, I'll go into some of these other terms later, but this is just some of the stuff that will be tied into the Golden Dawn. As such, as being set up on the Kabbalah, it's a system that's based upon the Sephira of the Tree of Life. And if I was better at technology, I would have a diagram of that, but I'm not. So, there's 10 Sephiroth and 10 degrees. I'm only going to go through the names of the degrees and the association with the Sephira here. Sephira is singular, Sephiroth is group. The complexity of each of these levels is exceptionally large, and when you really start to go through it, and I've went through a version of this solitary work, it took me almost 3 years because it was such an intensive amount of research that you have to do, and I'm of the opinion that you do not elevate till you understand where you're at. And so that was what my biggest goal was when I was going through this, is I actually have a journal that is significantly thick, and I built my own version of the Tree of Life on a wall display so that I could actually really focus and build that knowledge as I was going along, because if you're wanting to do something, do it right, is how I look at it. So the names and the degrees, or the degrees and the titles and the Sephira, sorry, is the 10th degree, which is the bottom of the Tree of Life, is the Zealoter. It's the lowest degree, and it's associated with the Sephira of Malkuth. And if I say these names wrong, I do apologize. I've heard a lot of ways to say some of these names, so I'm just going to go with the most common one that I've heard. The 9th degree, which is the Theocris, sorry, is Yesod. The 8th degree is the Practicus, and that's Hod. The 7th degree is the Philosophosis, which is Netzach. 6th degree is the Adeptus Minor, which is Tifereth, which is closely associated with the heart chakra. The 5th degree is the Adeptus Minor, which is Gabora. The 4th degree is the Adeptus Exemptus, so you're a high adept, and that's Chesed. The 3rd degree is the Magister Templi, which is Bina. 2nd degree is Magus, or Mage, which is Shakma. And the 1st degree, the highest degree, which is the most difficult to actually achieve, is Ipsissimus, which is associated with the Sephira of Kether, which sits right above your head, right about the crown chakra area. And you can actually align, and this is the reason it takes some time to really go through each of these, because each one of those degrees is also associated with a portion of the body. There are very specific rituals you have to learn for each one. There is a level of knowledge that you have to achieve, and a lot of the times, and this was where Crowley got frustrated, because he was able to bust through this at the age of 23, I believe it was, 23, 24. He completed Ipsissimus within the Golden Dawn system, which up until that point, the average person would only get to the 4th or the 3rd degree, Adeptus Exemptus, sometimes to the Magister Templi, but rarely would they go beyond that, because in their mind it took so much time. But he was able to learn the information, do the practices, complete the spiritual journey, and that's one of the reasons that I do respect him, is he was able to do things within the magical community and the mystical community in these lodges that no one had done before. And it was because he had such a drive and a passion, and to be brutally honest with you, he had almost no self-preservation mode, because he would do things that other people were scared just because they were scared. And he was like, I'm going to do it anyway. So he would throw himself off the spiritual cliff just so that he could move forward. And in a lot of ways it worked out for him, and in other ways, there's a reason people hate him. So, but that's just a brief overview, and I mean brief because each one of those could take you 2 to 3 years to learn each degree. And if you were to join a genuine Golden Dawn Lodge from Regardie's lineage, I can guarantee you that it's going to take you some time to develop these skills. Even if you've already been on a journey for years, joining one of those lodges tomorrow, you're going to have some years ahead of you. But it's extremely worthwhile, and the reason it takes so long, one of the reasons, is as you go along, you're discovering yourself, your higher self, you're understanding your shadow, you're learning to work with your shadow. You don't actually, and I've heard this term in spiritual communities and it annoys me, you're not banishing your shadow self, the darker aspects of yourself. You're learning to understand how those integrate into the system as a whole, and you're trying to elevate that so that it doesn't banish a shadow, it actually elevates the shadow into something that's going to help you along your journey. And so that's something that you're learning through these 10 degrees within the Golden Dawn. And there's a lot of nuance that goes along with that, but that's kind of a basic overview. So when you claim a title or earn a degree position, you're actually stepping into this flow of spiritual energy. And you are connecting into that flow when you take on that name or title, when you're initiated into that degree or that position. You connect to your spiritual brothers and sisters who have gone before you, who have achieved that level. You are accepting the position and responsibility to the community you're working with. That title or position means something to others inside and, surprisingly, outside of the group you are in. For example, the title of High Priest or High Priestess in most covens means you have diligently practiced for a minimum of 3 to 5 years. You are able to perform the Divine Communion. You can officiate hand fasting, the pagan version of a wedding, which is an absolutely beautiful thing to watch if you ever get the chance to go to one. You are in a position to train the next generation. This is a very large level of responsibility that you have. You have faced your shadow, and you are now the representative of the Lord and Lady in the coven. You speak for them in a lot of ways. To the outside world, you're seen as a head pastor, a bishop, or a rabbi, and the person who leads your congregation. Those titles hold meaning, power, and respect. So, one thing that does come up when I am talking to people in the spiritual community and they'll make a claim, when you claim a title or position that you are not qualified for, and this is where I have a problem with people doing this, you overwhelm yourself if you tap into that flow of energy when you're not ready for it, and it will overwhelm you. Or you lead yourself down a path of ego and possible spiritual destruction. God, source, divine energy does not want to destroy people, but to grow, you need to understand the next step, and you only can grow as far as you're willing to stretch. So if you jump into something that you're outside of where you're stretching, it's not so much God source energy destroying you, you're stretching yourself beyond your boundaries, and that's where it causes some spiritual destruction. You'll step into a position you don't understand, and then you have, oh, this doesn't work. Well, no, it's not going to, because you haven't done the steps before that to get to the final point. And so a lot of people will try to stretch beyond where they know, and it will actually set them back. And a lot of times they'll walk away from a group because they thought they were ready for something, attempted, failed, and they said the group's a bunch of charlatans, and they'll walk away, which isn't true. You just overstepped where you were at. And that's where the high priests and the elders are really monitoring things. Claiming a title you have not been trained for and using that title and position will lead you to failure, especially if you're using it for clout. This is not a situation for clout. Humility is a huge part of understanding your shadow. Claiming the title of a high priest or a priestess when you've only sort of studied or practiced for a year or two, it's going to expose you as a fraud. And that's a guarantee. I don't have to question it. I already know that that's what's going to happen. A high priestess and a priest can perform a great deal of metaphysical feats because they have put in the time, the study, and the practice to be able to confidently and successfully perform these various tasks. The fraud will fail every time. Charlatans pop up frequently and are always revealed. Back in the day, we called them snake oil salesmen. Today, we have other terms for them, but I'll be nice and not use some of those here. But I'm going to repeat this part from the last video because it does mean a lot to me, and this is extremely important to me when you're on a spiritual journey. I don't care if you're going on a spiritual journey as a Christian, as a Catholic, as a Jew, as a pagan. This belief right here, what I'm about to say, to me, is the most important thing you can do. When you are on a spiritual journey, put in the time. Practice. Study more. Practice again. Study. If you're in a group, follow that syllabus to the letter. Memorize it. Embed it into who you are. As you gain knowledge and title, share that knowledge, always within the group's rules, of course, if you're in a group, with the next generation as the new dedicants come in. Respect those titles, degrees, and positions. Be respectful in your practice, showing that the lineage you are in is an ethical and moral one. And when you do that, people will notice and people will respect you because you have put in that time, effort, and it's showing up in your practice and your knowledge. So, I hope that you guys enjoyed this. It's a little bit more educational, but that's kind of where I'm going with what I'm trying to do here, is I'd like to bring some of this stuff into the more mainstream as much as I can. I mean, obviously it's not going to be too mainstream because it's an alternative belief anyway, but these are some things that I've just been seeing, and this is stuff that I would like to be able to clarify if I possibly can for you, and I hope that it did. If you liked the video, drop a like and a comment below, always being respectful even in your criticisms, because I do appreciate the comments. If you enjoyed what I'm doing and would like to see more, subscribe and hit the little notification thing. And if you have somebody that you think might be interested in this, or at least help clarify some stuff for them, you can go ahead and share that, and I do appreciate that as well. Other than that, I hope you have an awesome week, and I will see you in the next video.